Silence. For Yelena, the world was a soundless stage, but that night the ground beneath her feet screamed, a sinister vibration, a silent crack that only she, the deaf elder, could feel. The ancient ice, which sheltered her YAKUT village, was cracking, catastrophically. While everyone slept, oblivious to the abyss opening up, Yakutia's most feared polar bear sniffed in the darkness, drawn by the disturbance. Yelena knew she had to warn them, but how to convince a people who couldn't hear the danger surrounding them, and how to fight the colossal beast blocking the only escape route. What she would do would change everyone's destiny forever. The decision, though heavy, was clear in her mind. Yelena couldn't wait. Her wrinkled fingers trembled not from cold, but from an urgency that gnawed at her bones. She rose from her fur bed, her body bent by age, but her soul ablaze. Her eyes swept the small cabin. Boris, her 10-year-old grandson, slept deeply, the reason for her daily struggle. With hurried but firm steps, Yelena reached the heavy wooden door. The wind howled outside, a sound she could only imagine, but the vibration of the ice beneath her feet intensified into a melody of terror. She opened the door, the icy air invading the cabin, and stepped out into the starry darkness. The village was silent, the fires almost extinguished, only embers flickering under the chimneys. Yelena ran, as fast as her knees allowed, towards the cabin of her son, Ivan, the village leader. Each step was a hammer beating in her chest, the ice responding with a stronger, more insistent tremor. Reaching the door, she pounded repeatedly with the palm of her hand with all her might. The vibration she felt through the wood was one of desperate urgency. Minutes that felt like hours passed. Finally the door opened, revealing Ivan, his face marked by sleep and confusion. His brown eyes, so like hers, stared at his mother with a mixture of concern and irritation. He gestured, questioning the gravity of the nocturnal disturbance. Yelena, wide-eyed, pointed to the ground, then to the dark vastness of the frozen lake. She made a cracking motion with her hands, opening and closing them repeatedly, trying to convey the image of the ice breaking apart. Her face was contorted into a mask of dread and determination. Ivan frowned. He knew his mother's wisdom, but also her peculiarity. "Mother, what's happening? I can't understand," he gestured, his voice soft. Searching for a sign of danger that for him didn't exist, Ivan looked at the ground, then at the sky. To him, the ice was solid, imposing, eternal. Yelena shook her head vigorously, frustration burning in her chest. She grabbed Ivan's arm, pulling him outside. With bare feet in the snow, she forced him to feel the ground, to share the truth only she perceived. Her eyes pleaded, a silent plea that transcended words. She made him kneel, placing his hand on the ice, hoping he would feel it. Ivan hesitated, but the intensity in Yelena's gaze was undeniable. He knelt, his palm touching the icy surface. He felt nothing but the biting cold, the usual winter. He looked at his mother, shaking his head slowly, disbelief clear on his face. "There's nothing, Mother. The ice is firm." Despair threatened to swallow Yelena. How could she, who couldn't hear, make the world listen to her? But then, a new and stronger vibration ran through the ground, a tremor that made the cabins creak. Perhaps even Ivan noticed. Yelena pointed to the horizon, where the dark silhouette of a colossal polar bear emerged, drawn by the tremor. The danger was twofold, and time relentless. Ivan felt it. It wasn't the usual cold, nor the wind. It was an underground wave, a shiver that climbed through the soles of his feet and resonated in his bones. His eyes, previously skeptical, widened, fixed on the imposing figure emerging from the blizzard. The polar bear, a white and shadowy giant, seemed like a ghost, risen from the depths of winter. His heart hammered in his chest. The danger was real, visible, tangible. But his mother, she spoke of something more, something he didn't see. Yelena, seeing the change in her son's face, the understanding mixed with terror, grabbed his hand again. This time she led it not to the ice, but to Ivan's own chest, and then to her own, gesturing to the ground. She wanted him to feel the connection between the tremor she perceived and his frightened heart and the danger spreading beneath them. Her eyes pleaded, a torrent of silent emotions. The bear was a threat, yes, but the ice was the abyss. Ivan looked at the bear, then at his mother, then at the ground that now seemed to vibrate more intensely. The crack Yelena heard was now a deep murmur he could feel, a profound grinding coming from the depths. The entire village seemed to groan. Disbelief began to unravel, replaced by a chilling fear. He stood up abruptly, panic starting to take hold. "The bear! We need to wake everyone!" He gestured frantically, his voice choked. Yelena shook her head vehemently. It wasn't just the bear. She pointed to the ice, then to the bear, and then made a fleeing motion with her hands. She needed him to understand the route, the urgency of a planned escape, not a disordered panic. The beast was a dangerous distraction, but the ground beneath them was the sentence. Ivan, torn between the visible terror and his mother's ancestral wisdom, hesitated for a second. That tremor, the way his mother insisted on the ice. He knew she had a unique connection to the land. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his heart. "Yes, mother, the ice and the bear." He gestured to her, indicating he would follow. Together, mother and son ran through the cabins, pounding on doors with desperate urgency. The first faces that appeared were sleepy and irritated, but the distant roar of the bear, now more audible, and the growing tremor of the ice, which many were beginning to feel, transformed irritation into dread. The frightened children began to cry. "The ice is cracking! The bear is here!" Ivan shouted, his voice echoing in the night. He gestured to Yelena, who pointed to the ground with an expression of despair and unwavering conviction. The villagers, confused and terrified, began to emerge from their cabins, some armed with spears and bows, others merely with fear etched on their faces. An elder, Anya, with whom Yelena shared many silent conversations, approached, her eyes teary. "Yelena, what's happening? What do you feel?" she asked, her hands trembling as she touched Yelena's arm. Yelena, with a look of deep sadness, pointed to the ground, then to the darkness where the bear moved slowly, a mountain of white fur. Panic began to spread like a disease. The ice cracked again, a louder, more frightening sound that many could now hear. Small, thin cracks began to appear on the surface, like silvery veins under the moonlight. The ground beneath their feet was no longer solid, but a treacherous trap. The bear, now closer, let out a deep growl that made the air vibrate. The village was caught between the opening abyss and the approaching beast. Yelena's wisdom was the only hope, but how to guide a terrified people through the invisible? When the visible was so terrifying, Yelena felt the panic as a wave of heat and cold. Her eyes read the fear and confusion on the villagers' faces. Anya's hands trembled. Yelena squeezed them firmly, a silent gesture of comfort and determination. She had to act fast. The bear, a dark and imposing mass, moved with threatening slowness as if savoring the village's terror. Its eyes in the distance gleamed with ancient and cruel hunger. Ivan, pale, tried to organize the villagers, but his words were lost in the frightened murmur and the growing grinding of the ice. Spears pointed at the bear. Others looked at the thin cracks deepening beneath their feet. Yelena realized that the usual escape route to the safe bank was blocked by the beast. The bear knew. With a tug, Yelena called Ivan. She gestured, pointing to the bear and to the rapidly expanding cracks. She made a circular motion, indicating the compromised usual route. Her eyes, full of urgency, met Ivan's. She pointed in a different direction, where the ice seemed for an instant more stable and compact, though further away. It was a gamble based on her life of feeling the ice. Ivan, still disturbed by the bear, saw the clarity in his mother. He knew of her unique intuition about the ice. The tremor beneath their feet was undeniable. The bear, frightening, could be avoided if there was a path. He looked in the direction Yelena indicated, into the treacherous darkness. "That way, Mother, it's further and darker," he gestured, his voice almost inaudible amidst the cracks. Yelena shook her head with conviction. There was no time to hesitate. She grabbed Ivan's hand and pulled him. "Quick, this way!" Ivan shouted, pointing. At first, there was some resistance. The fear of the unknown was as great as that of the bear and the breaking ice. But the authority in his voice and the desperation in Yelena's eyes, already ahead, moved the people. Families huddled together, parents holding their children's hands. Boris, Yelena's grandson, woke with the commotion and ran to his grandmother, clinging to her skirt. Yelena felt his small body trembling and embraced him with one arm, while the other guided Ivan. She was the lighthouse without light or sound. The ice cracked and groaned. The bear let out a loud growl, a warning that made many scream. Yelena, however, did not stop. She felt every vibration, every fissure opening beneath her feet. Her steps were calculated, veering away from thinner, unstable areas. She guided the people along an invisible path, a labyrinth of safety in the chaos. The bear, drawn by the noise and panic, moved quickly. But Yelena's route led it away from the main group, using the unstable terrain to her advantage, creating a distraction. With each step, Yelena's heart beat in unison with the ice. She knew the slightest hesitation would be fatal. Ivan, now confident in his mother, helped push the slower ones and calm the frightened. "Follow Yelena. She knows the way," he shouted, his voice hoarse. The villagers, seeing the elders' determination and their leader's trust, followed with fervor, eyes fixed on the bent figure leading them through darkness and danger. The connection between them, forged in fear and hope, grew stronger. The abyss was behind, the bear ahead, but Yelena's wisdom opened a path. The wind whipped Yelena's wrinkled face, but she didn't feel the cold, only the urgency of the ice beneath her feet. Every tremor, every silent crack, was for her an invisible map of danger and salvation. Her eyes scanned the ground, searching for subtle variations in the surface, shadows that indicated thicker ice. She couldn't make a mistake. Boris, her small grandson, clung to her skirt, his face buried in the fabric, his body trembling. Yelena felt the weight of responsibility, but an unshakable strength sprang from her love for them. Ivan, right behind, maintained order, his voice hoarse from shouting instructions and encouragement. "Don't look back, stay together, follow Yelena." He helped the elders, held children who stumbled, his eyes fixed on his mother's figure, in whom he now fully trusted. The fear of the bear was still present, a colossal shadow that occasionally emerged in the darkness, its deep growl echoing. But Yelena, with ancestral cunning, used the chaos to her advantage, guiding the group along a longer route, but one that maintained a strategic distance from the beast, interested in the village's despair. The cracks in the ice became more evident, some opening with a sharp sound like a cry of pain from the earth itself. The villagers, previously skeptical, now felt the ice groan beneath their feet, a nauseating sensation of instability. Panic threatened to return, but Yelena's calm and determined presence was an anchor. She would stop, feel the ice, and then indicate the next direction with a firm nod or hand gesture, her eyes conveying a certainty that calmed their hearts. Anya, Yelena's elder friend, stumbled. Ivan supported her, but his eyes met Yelena's, a silent plea. Yelena gestured for Anya to lean on Ivan, and then pointed forward towards hope. The journey was arduous. The cold cut at exposed skin, and the darkness seemed to swallow safety. Children cried softly, their small bodies exhausted. but no one stopped. With each step, the connection between them deepened, a bond of trust and mutual dependence. Yelena felt the weariness in every bone, but adrenaline and responsibility propelled her. She was the compass, the silent voice leading them from the abyss. The bear, fixated on the remains of the village, was a distant threat, but the ice remained the most treacherous enemy. Suddenly, a huge crack opened ahead, a dark abyss that seemed to swallow the stars. A cry of horror escaped some villagers. The path was blocked. Yelena stopped abruptly, her heart pounding. She felt the vibration of the new fissure, the depth of the danger. Her eyes scanned the darkness, searching for an alternative. Panic surged. Ivan approached, his face pale. "Mother, what do we do?" He gestured, his voice choked. Yelena took a deep breath, closing her eyes, concentrating on the vibrations, on the silent melody of the ice. She felt a narrow passage, dangerous but possible, an unexpected detour through younger, more stable ice. It was an immense risk, the only way out. She opened her eyes, her determination renewed, and pointed to the new path, a thread of hope. Yelena pointed to the fissure, then to a spot on the right, where the ice seemed lower and of a slightly different color, a more bluish hue under the faint moonlight. It was new ice, formed over the old, less thick but perhaps more malleable, less prone to catastrophic cracks. Ivan followed his mother's gaze, his heart heavy. The new path was narrow, bordering the abyss that had opened, and seemed even more dangerous. "Mother, it's too risky. What if it doesn't hold?" He gestured, his voice choked with fear. Yelena shook her head vehemently. There was no other choice. Her eyes, fixed on Ivan's, conveyed a silent urgency that could not be ignored. She squeezed her son's hand, a gesture of trust and leadership. The bear, sensing their hesitation and grouping, let out a low, threatening growl, beginning to move towards them. Time was running out. "Let's go! Yelena knows what she's doing. Trust her!" Ivan shouted, his voice gaining strength. He turned to the villagers, who looked at the fissure with dread. The elder Anya, her face marked by worry, looked at Yelena, then at the abyss, and finally at her son, Ivan. A silent decision was made. She nodded, a sign of faith. Yelena was the first to move, slow and calculated steps, testing every inch of the ice beneath her feet. Boris, still clinging to her skirt, followed her like a small shadow. The young ice groaned under the weight, a sound Yelena felt more than heard, a subtle vibration that guided her. She reached back, offering support to those coming right after. The passage was treacherous. On one side, the dark abyss, where the lake water, now exposed, bubbled and roared. On the other, the ancient ice, cracking and snapping, threatening to collapse at any moment. The villagers moved in single file, their faces tense, their eyes wide with fear. Every step was a prayer. The exhausted children were carried in their parents' arms, their cries muffled by the sounds of the ice and wind. The polar bear, now closer, seemed to scent their vulnerability. It stopped at the edge of the main fissure, observing the group with a cold intelligence, as if it knew they were cornered. Its growl was deep, a warning that it wouldn't let them escape easily. Yelena felt the vibration of the growl through the ice, a constant reminder of the threat. She continued, her steps firm, her mind focused. With each vibration, she adjusted the route, veering away from weak spots, seeking the most resilient ones. It was a dance with danger, a silent ballet guided by a lifetime of wisdom. Ivan, right behind, repeated his mother's instructions, gesturing to the villagers to remain calm and follow her exact steps. The connection between them was palpable, a current of trust that united the group. Suddenly, the ice beneath Yelena's feet cracked more forcefully, a thin fissure opening before her. She stopped, her heart racing, but without losing composure. She felt the ice, sought an alternative. There was a small detour, a risky jump over a smaller fissure. She looked at Boris, then at Ivan. There was no time to hesitate. With a quick gesture, she indicated the jump, the determination in her eyes stronger than ever. Her people's lives depended on her courage. Yelena didn't hesitate. With an agile movement, surprising for her age, she leaped over the narrow fissure, landing lightly on the opposite side of the young ice. Boris, her grandson, let out a small, muffled cry, but the strength of his grandmother's embrace and the firmness of her arms propelled him forward. He closed his eyes, feeling the void beneath his feet for a terrifying instant, before feeling solid ground again. Yelena pressed him against her, a silent kiss on his hair, and then pointed to Ivan. Ivan, his heart in his throat, watched the scene. His mother's courage was aflame in the darkness. "One at a time, carefully," he shouted, his voice echoing. He helped Anya, Yelena's elder friend, to jump, holding her firmly. Fear was palpable, but the sight of Yelena and Boris on the other side, safe and sound, instilled a dose of hope. One by one, the villagers, with the help of Ivan and other younger men, crossed the small fissure, their faces marked by tension and relief. As the last villager jumped, the ice beneath Yelena's feet cracked again, a deeper, more prolonged sound. She felt the vibrations spread, an urgent warning. The fissure they had just crossed visibly widened. There was no turning back. The polar bear, observing from afar, let out a frustrated growl, realizing its prey was escaping its immediate grasp. Its eyes gleamed, fixed on the retreating group. Yelena, without losing time, continued to guide the people along the narrow and winding path of newer ice. With each step, she focused all her sensitivity on the vibrations, reading the terrain like an open book. Her gestures were precise, indicating subtle deviations, avoiding points that seemed safe to others, but which for her vibrated with imminent danger. Ivan, now completely immersed in his mother's leadership, translated her gestures into words, maintaining formation and rhythm. The cold was excruciating, but no one dared to stop. The wind cut, carrying with it snowflakes that stung the skin. The exhausted children cried in silence, nestled in their parents' arms. The darkness was almost total. Only the pale light of the moon and stars, and the distant glow of the village that now seemed a tiny, doomed speck. Suddenly, Yelena felt a different vibration, deeper and more resonant, coming not from the ice beneath her feet, but from something distant yet powerful. She stopped abruptly, wide-eyed, her body tense. It was a sound she had never heard before, a tremor that seemed to come from the very heart of the lake. She looked back, towards the village, and then forward, into the darkness. The polar bear, which had moved away slightly, also stopped, its head raised, sniffing the air, its eyes fixed in the same direction, as if sensing something even more threatening. Ivan noticed the change in his mother's expression. "Mother? What is it?" He gestured, his voice low, fear clutching at his chest. The villagers, sensing the pause and tension, also stopped, their eyes fixed on Yelena. The ice beneath them seemed to vibrate with a new intensity, a deep murmur that everyone could now feel, a sound that wasn't a crack, but of something much larger, something moving the very earth in its depths. A wave of silent despair swept through the group. Yelena pointed forward to the horizon. Her eyes were filled with a new apprehension, a concern that surpassed the fear of the bear. The tremor she felt was of a massive displacement, a change in the very structure of the ice, perhaps an entire plate moving beneath the vast surface of the lake. It was a different danger, more unpredictable and comprehensive, which rendered the path ahead, which previously seemed more stable, now entirely compromised by this new and vast movement. The bear let out a low growl, almost a lament, as if confirming the imminent danger and the futility of escape. Yelena's carefully planned escape route was now in jeopardy, and they were trapped on a stretch of young, unstable ice, with time running out and the abyss opening in new ways. Yelena's carefully planned escape route was now in jeopardy, and they were trapped on a stretch of young, unstable ice. With time running out and the abyss opening in new ways, the bear let out a low growl, almost a lament, as if confirming the imminent danger and the futility of escape. This new tremor was not just a crack. It was a deep and systemic displacement. Yelena's senses were overwhelmed. The ice beneath them, previously a treacherous but navigable path, now seemed like a living, groaning entity, its very foundation in constant flux. She could feel the vastness of the lake, an immense mass of water and ice readjusting like a giant awakening from a millennial sleep. Her eyes, which once read the shadows and colors of the ice, now sought something more, a new logic in the chaos. The panic she had managed to contain threatened to engulf everyone. Ivan, by her side, held Boris with one arm, his face contorted in a mixture of terror and disorientation. "Mother, what is this? Where do we go now?" He gestured, his voice hoarse, almost a whisper. The villagers, paralyzed, looked at Yelena, at the dark horizon, and at the bear, which, at a safe distance, seemed to observe nature's spectacle with a grim curiosity. Yelena closed her eyes for an instant, concentrating. She couldn't afford to hesitate. Her people's lives depended on her. The love for Boris, for Ivan, for Anya, for every soul there, was a fire burning in her chest, stronger than the cold and fear. She felt the vibrations. The displacement was not uniform. There was a pattern, an underground current of movement that, if understood, could be used. The ice to her left, which previously seemed thinner, now vibrated differently, as if being pushed, compacted by this invisible force. It was an insane risk, but perhaps the only chance. She opened her eyes, her expression of deep concentration transforming into an iron determination. She pointed to the left, into the darkness bordering the new abyss, where the ice seemed more chaotic, but to her revealed a strange promise of temporary stability. Ivan followed his mother's gaze, then to the side, where the ice seemed even more fragmented. "Mother, there? It's a labyrinth of broken ice!" He gestured, his voice full of despair. Yelena shook her head vehemently. It wasn't broken, it was moving. It was a dangerous dance, but she felt the rhythm. She gestured for him to trust, to feel the difference. Anya, beside Ivan, touched Yelena's arm. Her teary eyes pleaded for an explanation, for a sign of hope. Yelena squeezed Anya's hand, conveying her own courage. She then took Boris's trembling hand and placed it on the ice, then on her own chest, gesturing for him to feel the life pulsing there, the connection. "There's no time to explain. Trust Yelena," Ivan shouted, his voice echoing in the darkness. He knew his mother's intuition was the only compass they had. The bear, at a considerable distance, let out a louder growl, a sound that seemed like a warning, not an attack, as if the beast itself was frightened by the magnitude of what was happening. Yelena, without hesitation, took the first step in the direction she had indicated. Her feet felt the ice, reading every vibration, every change in pressure. She moved with surprising agility, dodging rising blocks and opening fissures. It was as if she were dancing with the ice itself, anticipating its movements. Boris, clinging to her skirt, followed her, his small steps synchronized with his grandmother's. Ivan, with a nod, asked the villagers to follow her closely, maintaining formation. Fear was a constant presence, but Yelena's silent leadership, her unwavering courage, instilled a new dose of hope. They were entering unknown territory, a constantly changing labyrinth, but trust in Yelena was the only light in the darkness. The ice groaned, cracked, and moved. But Yelena, the deaf elder, was the only one to hear its song and guide them through it, towards an uncertain but possible salvation. With each step, The connection between them deepened, a bond forged in adversity, in faith in a woman whom society had underestimated, but who was now the sole and precious hope for all. With each step, the connection between them deepened, a bond forged in adversity, in faith in a woman whom society had underestimated, but who was now the sole and precious hope for all. Yelena moved through the constantly changing ice labyrinth. Every movement she made was the fruit of a life of silent observation, an ancestral wisdom that transcended common hearing. Like a maestro, she orchestrated the symphony of survival, her body attuned to the deep resonant hum of the vast frozen lake. The ice beneath her feet, a living entity, groaned and trembled, speaking a language only she understood in her soul. She felt the subtle currents of the water below, the pressure of the ice plates, and the fleeting stability amidst the chaotic dance. Her eyes, without hearing, saw the world with an intensity that compensated for her silence, catching nuances invisible to others. They scrutinized the faintest changes in texture, the almost imperceptible rise and fall of the surface, guiding her along paths that seemed impossible to others. Boris, her grandson, clung to her coat, his small face buried in the fur, his trembling body a constant reminder of the precious lives she carried. Her calloused hand gently stroked his head, a silent promise of protection and unconditional love. Ivan, right behind, maintained the pace, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He watched his mother with awe and terror, a devotion he had never imagined feeling. Her figure, small and bent, navigated the treacherous terrain with almost supernatural grace. "Follow her! Don't hesitate!" he shouted, his voice strained, his words barely audible over the groaning of the ice and the biting wind that whipped their faces. He reached out to steady Anya, whose steps grew heavy, her face marked by exhaustion and worry. Anya, in turn, gave Yelena a tired smile, a silent and profound acknowledgement of her leadership. The villagers, pale and drawn, followed in a tight, desperate line, their eyes fixed on the elder. They stumbled, they slipped, but they did not stop. Every crack and groan of the ice sent shivers, a constant reminder of the abyss opening at every moment. The fear of being left behind, of falling into the icy depths, propelled them. The cold and relentless enemy bit at exposed skin, numbing fingers and toes. But the warmth of shared purpose, the will to survive, burned stronger than any physical discomfort. The polar bear, a ghostly white shape against the snow, remained menacing, a colossal shadow that followed them. Moving parallel, the silent hunter observed its prey. Its growls, less frequent, were now a guttural rumble that Yelena felt through the soles of her boots, a vibration of caution. The beast, too, felt the instability of the domain, its predatory instincts subdued by the overwhelming power of nature in fury. Yelena, however, used its presence to her advantage, transforming the threat into an element of her strategy. She guided the group away from the bear's direct sight, creating a complex and winding path that exploited the moving ice. She knew that the bear, despite its power, was less adept at navigating intricate and unstable passages. Her strategy was not to confront, but to outmaneuver, using the very chaos of the environment as a protective shield. Suddenly, a huge ice plate ahead tilted violently, showering them with icy fragments. A collective cry of horror escaped the villagers, overcome by despair, as the path Yelena indicated became an irregular wall of rising ice. Ivan froze, his heart pounding against his ribs. "Mother! The path! It's blocked again!" he exclaimed, his voice choked with despair, frantic gestures expressing his dread. Yelena stopped, her body rigid, her face a mask of intense concentration, not allowing panic to overwhelm her. She closed her eyes, her senses extending, feeling the new configuration of the ice, the sudden and massive change in the vast underground currents. The tremor was immense, catastrophically reorganizing the landscape beneath them. But even in this new chaos, she felt a faint, almost imperceptible opening, a narrow passage forming where two large ice plates momentarily pressed together, creating a temporary and incredibly fragile bridge. It was a window, a fleeting opportunity that demanded immediate action and unwavering courage, a chance that would disappear as quickly as it had appeared. She opened her eyes, her gaze piercing the darkness with renewed urgency, and pointed with unshakable determination to the newly formed passage, a thread of hope in the overwhelming desolation. Yelena didn't wait. With an agility that age had not managed to steal, she moved, her steps firm and decisive towards the narrow fissure that had opened between the ice plates. It was not a path, but a temporary breach, a dangerous invitation to the unknown. The ice groaned and creaked beneath her feet, but she felt the pressure of the two gigantic masses meeting, creating an ephemeral bridge. Boris, clinging to her skirt, was gently propelled by her, his small feet feeling for space before finding unstable support. Yelena held him tightly, her eyes conveying a silent promise that everything would be all right, a warmth that warmed the boy's soul. Ivan, his heart in his throat, watched his mother. The passage was an abyss between two colliding worlds of ice, a challenge to gravity and logic. "Quick, one at a time! Stay calm!" he shouted, his voice hoarse with effort and fear. He reached out to Anya, whose teary eyes reflected the terror of the situation. The elder, with a trembling sigh, held on to Ivan and, with an act of blind faith, launched herself into the fissure, landing with a soft thud beside Yelena. The fragility of the ice was palpable, but the leader's determination was contagious, a silent force that propelled them. One by one, the villagers began to cross, terrified, but driven by the sight of Yelena and Boris on the other side. Each jump was an act of courage, each landing a momentary relief. The stronger men helped the women and children, forming a human chain of support and solidarity. The ice beneath them trembled and shifted, and the passage Yelena had pointed to seemed to close slowly, the ice plates tightening and rising, threatening to crush anyone in the midst of crossing. Yelena, however, did not stop. Her senses were sharpened, reading the ice's vibrations as if they were words. She felt the pressure increasing, the window of opportunity narrowing, but also felt a current of stability, a flow of movement that, if followed precisely, could lead them out of that labyrinth. She gestured with urgency, indicating the rhythm, the direction, the safest points to step. Her movements were almost a ballet, a dance with danger itself, a choreography of survival. The polar bear, still at a distance, let out a deep growl, not of attack, but of strange perplexity. The beast seemed to sense the magnitude of the ice displacement, the unpredictability of nature in fury. It watched the group move, a dark smudge against the white, its predatory instincts momentarily overcome by caution. Yelena felt the growl through the ice, a constant reminder that although the bear was hesitant, it was still an imminent and vigilant threat. As the last of the villagers, a young hunter named Kale leaped to safety. The passage closed with a deafening roar, sending a cloud of ice fragments into the air. The path they had just crossed vanished, swallowed by the lake's fury. There was no turning back, only forward, the darkness and the uncertain promise of a new dawn. The group was now on a new section of ice, still unstable, but different from the previous labyrinth. Yelena felt they had passed through a bottleneck, and the ice here, though moving, was vaster, offering more options for deviation. Weariness was visible on every face, but a new spark of hope shone in the villagers' eyes. They had survived yet another insurmountable obstacle, guided by Yelena's silent wisdom. Ivan, exhausted but with renewed vigor, looked at his mother, then at the group. "Keep going, we can't stop," he shouted, his voice stronger, more confident. Yelena nodded, a faint smile on her lips cracked by the cold. She squeezed Boris's hand, who now looked at her with admiration, his childlike eyes full of unwavering faith. The cold continued to bite, the wind to howl, but the spirit of her people, forged in adversity, burned like an unquenchable flame. They advanced one step at a time towards salvation. They advanced one step at a time towards salvation. With each movement, Yelena felt the ice beneath her feet as an extension of her body, a vast, cold skin that breathed and groaned. The vibrations, now more complex, demanded her full concentration. She could feel the underwater currents, the way the icy water pushed the ice plates, creating a slow ballet of destruction and renewal. Her eyes scanned the dark horizon, searching for patterns, fissures that might indicate a safe passage. The relentless cold penetrated her clothes, but the flame of hope and responsibility burned in her chest, warming her. Boris, his face pale and eyes wide with exhaustion, still clung to her skirt, his small fingers clutching the fabric with desperate strength. Yelena paused for an instant, bent down, and kissed his icy forehead, a silent gesture that spoke of a love transcending fear. He looked at her, and in his childlike eyes, Yelena saw not only terror, but an unwavering faith in the grandmother who guided him. This faith was her fuel. Ivan, right behind, translated Yelena's gestures, his voice now hoarser but firm. "Maintain formation. Don't look back. Trust Yelena," he shouted, reaching out to help an elderly woman balance on a slippery stretch. Exhaustion was visible on every face, but the sight of Yelena, small and determined, instilled in them a strength they didn't know they possessed. Anya, her face marked by frozen tears but with a faint smile, nodded to Yelena, an acknowledgement of her courage. She felt every tremor, every crack of the ice, and knew that the danger was far from over. But Yelena's presence, her unshakable calm, was a balm to their souls. The polar bear, which had remained at a distance, now seemed closer, an imposing silhouette against the pallor of the snow. Its growls were more frequent, a deep sound that Yelena felt through the soles of her boots, a warning that the beast's patience was running out. It seemed to have found a more stable path, and now moved with greater speed, closing the distance between them. Suddenly, the ice beneath Yelena's feet began to vibrate differently, an irregular and accelerated rhythm. It wasn't a crack, but a rotational movement. As if an invisible gear were turning beneath the surface, large blocks of ice began to rise and sink, creating a dizzying labyrinth of constantly changing peaks and valleys. The path that once seemed vaster and more promising now transformed into a frozen whirlpool. A cry of despair escaped the villagers, who stumbled and fell, panic threatening to engulf them. Ivan, with Boris in his arms, looked at his mother, his eyes full of disorientation. "Mother, what do we do? There's no path," he gestured, his voice choked. Yelena closed her eyes again, her senses sharpening. She felt the force of the rotation, the raw energy of the moving lake. But amidst the chaos, she perceived something. The movement was not random. There was a central point, an invisible axis around which the ice rotated. If they could reach this center, perhaps they could use the force itself to propel themselves out of the whirlpool to a more stable area of ice. It was a colossal risk, a gamble on nature's own fury. She opened her eyes, her expression of concentration transforming into an even fiercer determination. She pointed to the center of the whirlpool, a place that seemed the most dangerous, but which for her now was the only hope. Ivan followed his mother's gaze, then to the swirling ice that rose and fell. "The center! It's madness, Mother! We'll be crushed!" he cried, despair in his voice. Yelena shook her head vehemently, her gestures firm, conveying the urgency of her perception. She gestured for them to feel the rhythm, the current. "Trust her!" Ivan shouted to the villagers, his voice echoing. The polar bear, now at a dangerously close distance, let out a loud growl, a sound of frustration and hunger, as if it perceived Yelena's desperate maneuver and was ready to attack. Yelena, without hesitation, took the first step towards the center of the whirlpool, her feet feeling the moving ice, her eyes fixed on salvation. The ice beneath Yelena groaned with increasing fury, a chorus of cracks and creaks that for her was the voice of the lake itself in agony. Every vibration was a map, an invisible guide through the chaos. She felt the centrifugal force pulling, but also the pressure of the plates meeting, creating momentary points of support. Her muscles, stiffened by cold and age, responded with surprising agility, a reflection of a lifetime of harmony with nature. Boris, with a muffled cry, clung to her, his small body swaying dangerously. Yelena held him with one arm, her other hand extended, gesturing to Ivan and the others. There was no time for explanations, only for blind trust. Ivan, seeing his mother advance towards what seemed like suicide, who felt despair clutch at his chest, but the determination on Yelena's face was unshakable. "Let's go! Now! Trust Yelena!" he roared, his voice almost lost in the howling wind and the booming ice. He took Anya by the hand, pulling her forward, while the villagers, in a mix of terror and faith, began to follow, their steps hesitant but propelled by urgency. The whirlpool swallowed them, and the world around became a dizzying dance of blue-grey ice, rising and falling, threatening to crush them at every instant. Yelena felt the polar bear, now dangerously close, its deep growl resonating through the ice like a war drum. The beast, irritated and hungry, seemed to have found a more stable route to approach the group, its eyes fixed on its prey. But the very chaos of the ice was a barrier, a minefield that even the bear hesitated to cross with total abandon. Yelena perceived the animal's hesitation, a window of opportunity. She knew that the beast, despite its strength, was guided by more direct instincts, less adaptable to the complexity of that movement. At the center of the whirlpool, where Yelena guided them, the movement was more intense, but also more predictable. She felt the rhythm, the pulsation of the ice. There was a moment, a fraction of a second, when the plates aligned, creating a temporary platform, a natural springboard. It was there that their fate lay. With a quick and decisive gesture, she indicated the exact spot. "Now!" Ivan shouted, translating his mother's silent urgency. One by one, or in small groups, the villagers, propelled by the force of the rotation and Yelena's precise guidance, leaped onto the unstable platform. With each jump, the ice groaned but held. Yelena, with Boris safe in her arms, waited, feeling for the right moment. The bear, seeing the group move with unexpected speed, let out a roar of fury and frustration and charged, ignoring caution. But at that exact instant, one of the giant plates of the whirlpool violently rose between it and the group, creating an insurmountable barrier, a wall of ice that prevented it from reaching its prey. The bear, caught by surprise, recoiled, its growl transforming into a furious lament. Yelena seized the distraction. With a final, powerful thrust, she and Boris were launched out of the whirlpool, landing on an area of ice that, though still vibrating, was visibly more stable. The villagers, one by one, followed her, using the force of the rotating ice to propel themselves to relative safety. Exhausted, breathless, they huddled beside Yelena, their eyes fixed on the elder, on little Boris, and on the furious whirlpool that now separated them from the bear. They had passed through the bottleneck, a feat that seemed impossible. The ice was still moving, but the immediate danger of the whirlpool had been overcome. With each breath, a new wave of hope washed away the fear, a silent testament to Yelena's wisdom and courage. They were closer to salvation, guided by the woman who heard the song of the ice. They were closer to salvation, guided by the woman who heard the song of the ice. The cold air still cut, but a warmth of hope spread among the villagers, the silence filled by the breathless gasps of hearts that had defied the abyss. Yelena, with Boris nestled in her arms, felt the ice beneath her feet calm, the vibrations diminishing to a distant murmur. The lake's most intense fury had been overcome. Ivan knelt beside her, His face exhausted, but his eyes shining with gratitude. He touched his mother's shoulder, a gesture more eloquent than words. "Mother." His voice choked, the words lost in a sigh. Yelena looked at him. A gentle smile touched her lips. She squeezed Boris's hand, who slept, exhausted but safe. Anya and the villagers approached, faces pale, gazes fixed on Yelena. There was no more disbelief, only admiration and deep respect. Kale, the young hunter who had previously doubted, knelt before her, bowing his head in reverence. Others followed, some with tears streaming down their frozen faces. It was a silent but powerful acknowledgement of the woman who had saved them. Yelena, feeling the energy of gratitude that enveloped her, felt a warmth spread through her chest. All her life, she had been the different one, the one who couldn't hear. Now her silence had become her greatest strength, her deepest connection to the world. She gestured to Ivan, indicating they needed to continue, that true safety lay on solid ground. Ivan stood up, his posture more erect, his voice stronger. "She says we need to continue. Solid ground is near. Follow her," he shouted, without hesitation, with the conviction of a leader who had found his compass. The villagers, invigorated by new hope and the unwavering leadership of Yelena and Ivan, began to move again. The polar bear, blocked by the wall of ice, let out a final growl of frustration, a sound Yelena felt dissipate in the icy air. The beast, realizing its prey had escaped, turned and disappeared into the blizzard, a distant threat. Yelena continued to guide, her steps slower, weariness weighing on her, but her determination unshakable. She felt the change in the ice's texture, the transition from floating plates to a more solid mass, more connected to the land. Finally, after what seemed an eternity, she felt the unmistakable vibration of rock, of frozen earth beneath the ice, a sensation of solidity, of permanence. She stopped, raising her hand, and Ivan, understanding the gesture, halted the group. Ahead, through the darkness, a darker shadow rose, the lake's edge, the solid ground they had sought. A collective sigh of relief escaped the villagers. They had arrived. Yelena turned to the group, her eyes scanning each face. She saw exhaustion, fear, but above all, gratitude and renewed hope. She gestured with a sweeping motion towards the solid ground. "We are safe," Ivan translated, his voice heavy with emotion. The villagers one by one stepped onto the land, feeling the solidity beneath their feet, a safety that felt like a miracle. Some fell to their knees, kissing the frozen ground. Others embraced their loved ones, tears mixing with the steam of their breaths. Yelena, with Boris still in her arms, was the last to step onto solid ground. She felt the cold rock, the unshakable stability. The weight of responsibility began to dissipate, replaced by a profound sense of peace. Ivan approached, gently took Boris from his mother's arms and embraced her tightly. A hug that contained years of regret, of unexpressed love, and of an admiration that was now boundless. Yelena, in her silent world, felt the strength of that embrace, the unbreakable connection of her family, the bond reinforced in the terrible ordeal. She looked at the dark sky, at the stars that shone cold and indifferent, and then at her people, gathered, safe. The village was lost, but life had prevailed. Ancestral wisdom, resilience, and human connection had triumphed over nature's fury. Yelena, the deaf elder, had guided her people to a new dawn, proving that true strength resides in those whom society sometimes underestimates. The journey had been arduous, but faith and courage had ignited an unquenchable light in every heart. Faith and courage, ignited in adversity, would shine forever. On that icy night, beneath the mantle of indifferent stars, the solid ground felt like a welcoming embrace. The villagers, exhausted, but their hearts overflowing with silent gratitude, began to organize. Ivan, with renewed energy, took practical leadership, guiding where to light fires and set up makeshift shelters with furs and branches. Yelena, with Boris asleep in her lap, observed everything, feeling the rhythm of her people, the resilience that emerged from adversity. The vibrations of the earth, now stable and secure, were a balm to her soul. Anya, her hands still trembling but her eyes firm, approached Yelena and offered her a piece of dried meat. Yelena accepted with a nod, the gesture of affection more valuable than the food itself. Kyle, the young hunter, who once saw strength only in muscles, now helped the elders, his eyes fixed on Yelena, seeking in her the source of new wisdom. Disbelief had been swept away by the icy wind, replaced by deep and lasting respect. Dawn arrived, painting the sky in shades of pink and pale blue, revealing the vast and untouched landscape of the lake's edge. It was a new beginning, a blank canvas. The original village was lost, but the community, the true heart of the YAKUT people, was stronger than ever. They gathered in a circle, the warmth of the fires and each other's presence offering comfort against the persistent cold. Ivan stood in the center, his eyes scanning each face, then fixing on Yelena. "We lost our homes, but we did not lose ourselves." He gestured, his voice resonating with new authority. "We have Yelena's wisdom, the strength of our youth, and the unity of our people. We will build a new village, stronger, safer." The villagers responded with nods and murmurs of approval. The vision of a future, previously obscured by panic, now shone with renewed clarity. Yelena, sitting with Boris in her lap, felt the vibrations of their voices, the collective pulse of hope. She raised her hand, and everyone turned to her, eager for her guidance. With slow and deliberate gestures, she indicated the east, towards the distant hills, where the land rose higher and offered shelter from the winds. It was a place she felt to be safer, with firm rocks and trees for building. Ivan translated, and the decision was accepted without question. The journey would continue, but now with a clear purpose and unwavering faith. The polar bear, an imminent threat, was now a distant memory, a test overcome. They had faced nature's fury and a beast's hunger, and emerged victorious, not through brute force, but through intelligence, intuition, and unity. In the days that followed, the community moved eastward, step by step, under Yelena's silent guidance. She, who was once seen as the fragile elder, was now the compass, the guardian of a wisdom that transcended common senses. Whenever a treacherous crack in the ice or a stretch of deep snow appeared, Yelena, with a simple touch on Ivan's shoulder, indicated the safest path. Their trust in her was absolute. Boris, the small grandson, became her shadow, his childlike eyes absorbing every gesture of his grandmother. He would be the bridge to the future, the guardian of Yelena's wisdom, learning to feel the world more deeply. Ivan, in turn, had transformed into a strong and compassionate leader, his respect for his mother unshakable. He knew that the true strength of his people lay in diversity, in the ability to value each member. Finally, they reached the hills Yelena had indicated, a rocky plateau, sheltered from the winds, with a small forest of frozen conifers offering wood and shelter. It was the perfect location for a new beginning. The villagers immediately began to work, building permanent shelters, hunting and gathering, their hearts filled with vibrant hope. Yelena sat on a rock, observing her people. The sun set, painting the sky with shades of orange and purple. She felt the cold, but also the warmth of the community, the pulse of life. The village on the ice had become a memory, but the new village built on the rock of resilience and wisdom would be an eternal testament to the strength of the human spirit. The story of Yelena, the deaf elder who felt the world, would be told for generations, a reminder that true strength lies in connection, in overcoming adversity, and in the love that unites a people. Faith and courage, ignited in adversity, would shine forever, illuminating the path to a promising future in frigid Yakutia.